5th Vox Log of Arbites Investigator Valix Alernis, 892-995-M41. We motored back to the Griffin Cell's base of operations in the afternoon, after which I peeled off and began plying the local enforcer stations and Arbites fortress precincts. Passing comments by some of my compatriots, specifically the witch, regarding their poor opinions of Romarian law enforcement rankled me as something fierce. I decided to try and get a pulse of the various apparati of justice in the Primus Dome. A few flashes of my fake enforcer ident, generous offerings of low sticks and recaf, and a joke or two about the magistrate Minoris's lisp ingratiated me with just about any cop I came across. Overall, my impression was one of mediocrity. While threads of corruption are definitely present, the overall correction structure of the city seems more overworked than crooked. Preparations for the upcoming renegotiation and coronation ceremonies, which will be celebrated planet-wide, are preventing the unified and concerted response necessary to quash the ongoing labor riots. It's a situation I've encountered all too many times before. Enforcement agencies perpetually undermanned, underfunded, and stretched thin across far too many obligations. I caught a ride back via light rail, back to the rundown station near Max Originals as the day cycle approached midnight, satisfied that my adeptus on Ramar was beyond reproach. Next morning I awoke to a heated argument echoing down the hallway of Hab cells from the main workspace. Getting dressed and setting Old Faithful to percolating, I then wandered out to the rest of the cell, to find Helstrex bawling his eyes out over his religious texts, which I gathered Draken had defaced in some way. Norstrike and Marn were clearly on their way out, and impeccably dressed, with the interrogator cutting a particularly striking figure in a form-fitting gown of crimson. She acted completely different to how we'd known her up to this point, looking to all the world an exuberant and coquettish socialite. With a giggle, an honest-to-throne giggle, she departed with Enos for the upper hive, narrowly sidestepping an ass grab from Hilaire, the dog. Looking after the two Griffin members as they departed, Bright Eyes began slinking up the staircase, only to slip on something that sent him careening back down to the base of the steps. Finding the culprit to be a metallic silver cylinder, we warily inspected it for several minutes before twisting the thing open. Inside was a collection of liquid-filled ampules and needles, their exact purpose unknown to even higher. It finally dawned on us that this was Spear 6's package, which we were to deliver. Checking in on Norstrike's cogitator, we noted the recorded movements of the Imperial Navy lorry we'd stuck the tracking data slate to. The damn thing making multiple stops all up and down the hive dome before coming to an 8-hour rest. I noted the locations down for follow-up later, but I'm concerned that that lead may be going cold. Another recording from the MI captain started playing, describing their planned infiltration of the Romarian nobility as high-class purveyors of illicit pharmaceuticals, all with some kind of mind wipe involved in the preservation of their cover. He then went on to encourage our continued pursuit of the Cienkov angle, which we subsequently departed for in Blackwater's auto carriage. Arriving at the Cienkov estate, security was omnipresent and moderately heavy. Scores of carapace-clad houseguards in the family's colors were visible throughout the interior of the manor's dome within a dome, with the sentinels at the front gates waving us through upon checking Hilaire's ident. Marble pillars, likely imported from off-world, lined the exterior of the main household, while finely wrought fountains gurgled lazily at various points down the front drive. Greeted at the main door by a butler who introduced himself as 1-0, the manservant immediately launched into addressing each and every one of us by our actual names, alongside Spear 6's cover rolls. A partial oversight, to be sure. Led into the inner chambers by more house guards wielding garishly ornamented lasguns, we entered the Eos of Cienkov's study, where we found him spiritedly fencing one of his unfortunate retainers. As the prince battered his man into exhausted submission, the rest of us had a chance to take in the room around us. Darkwood bookshelves wrapped around the walls, laden with books and tomes focusing on tectonic and ice sheet geology, fencing, and nature expeditions. In one of the corners stood a large globe suspended by well-concealed grav plates, labeled with numerous past expeditions the minor prince had undertaken. His bout over, he turned his attention to Blackwater expectantly, expressing his eagerness to receive an anticipated delivery of powerful perfumes from the 8 Moons. Blackwater produced the silver cylinder and began handing over the fragrance vials one at a time, as he wrapped the young noble up in flattery and conversation. When asked about his present functions as a nobleman, he happily told us that he performed practically none, focusing rather on pursuits of leisure and fancy. Apparently, his father had been an accomplished statesman, though often absent during the prince's childhood, but upon his death, management of the Cienkov household passed to bureaucratic regions. Essentially trapped in this conservatorship, Yosef Cienkov seems to me a prisoner, stuck inside a gilded cage. His every movement is monitored and tracked, and the number of Vox and pick-bugs we spotted throughout the house was immense, while his pastimes seemed carefully curated to keep him perpetually docile. My best read of the man is one of over-the-top eccentricism, possibly manifested as some kind of coping mechanism, related to his father, perhaps. At any rate, Blackwater made a good enough impression with our host to earn the cell a place by the noble's side this evening, 2000 local, at the Grand Prince's ball. And wouldn't you know it, Cienkov is looking forward to meeting a Baroness von Marius at this function. Happy to share her likeness with us, he produced a small color pic of none other than Elias Marn, dolled up in much the same manner as we had seen her earlier today. I can't imagine this going unwell at all. After a brief visit to a large indoor archery range, the house head led us into a room which Greybast had warned us contained a powerful psyker. Upon meeting the source of this presence, the prince introduced the gaunt and aged man to us as the Wizard. Though this character was stuck in trance for the entirety of our visit, Dark later told me that Cienkov's witch was immensely powerful, and the man was clearly old, having served several generations of the household without interruption. Yosef went on to describe how his wizard was a master of divination and was primarily responsible for deciding the destination of his next nature excursion. At this point, I introduced myself to the prince as Blackwater's head of security and asked if I could meet with my counterpart from the Cienkov household. A short while later, he appeared, identifying himself as Justikar Lars V. His position seemingly a hereditary one. When pressed for more information regarding the security detail he'd be providing his charge for tonight's function, he explained that Grand Prince Frolov's house guard would take over protection of every guest upon their arrival. Final conversation between our corsair and the minor prince continued during a walk around the latter's grounds, throughout which I observed dozens of surveillance devices. Catching snippets of their chatter, I heard Blackwater inquire about the consortium, the Ramarian mob of sorts, of which Cienkov admitted he'd heard of but knew little about. It's obvious Hilaire is trying his damnedest to worm into the existing power structure of organized crime here. Our visit concluded, we piled back into the auto carriage before returning to Max Originals. None of Cell Griffin were immediately visible, and as I went to check on their personal quarters, I spotted the far door ajar at the end of the hallway. Poking my head into Draken's room for the first time was an unpleasant experience. A foul musk permeated the already stale recycled hive atmosphere, and easily a score of smut magazines lay strewn across most every surface. Just as I turned to leave, though, one of the lockers in the back of the room caught my eye. Wading ankle-deep through the cheaply printed pornography, I squatted down and confirmed my suspicion. False bottom, with a plate that didn't sit perfectly flush like the other lockers. With a little bit of help from the others, I got the storage unit accessible before fishing a data slate out of the hidden compartment. Handing it immediately over to Garn, he quickly recognized that the thing had been rigged as a two-way transponder. With healthy curiosity, we had him begin cracking into the digital correspondence just as the room's owner started crashing down the main stairway. Blackwater and I quickly moved to run interference and buy our tech savant time. A few insults, punches, and middle fingers later, and Garn was barely clear of Draken's room by the time he stormed into it and locked the door behind him. Once we were certain Griffin's fourth member had settled down, we all converged on Garn's data slate with copied messages. All of the entries were signed by either P, S, or D, initials we'd also found in Salaworth's data spools back in his warehouse. Whatever we do next, we need to be smart about it. And fast. In Vox Log.